Most people misunderstand what strength looks like. They imagine it has a certain tone of voice, a certain expression, a certain way of walking into a room that immediately commands attention. But if you've ever watched someone who genuinely possesses influence, you'll notice something unexpected. They rarely try to prove it. The people who constantly announce how strong they are usually aren't trying to convince everyone else. They're trying to convince themselves. Real confidence behaves differently. It doesn't rush to fill every silence. It doesn't argue over every disagreement. It doesn't panic when someone misunderstands it. And it certainly doesn't measure its worth by how much approval it collects from strangers. Somewhere along the way, many women were taught that being endlessly accommodating was the same as being kind. That making everyone comfortable was a virtue. That saying yes more often would make them more lovable. The intention behind those lessons may have been good, but when kindness becomes the inability to establish boundaries, it stops being kindness. It becomes self-neglect. There's an important distinction between generosity and overextension. Generosity is a choice. Overextension is often driven by fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear that saying no will make people leave. Those fears can quietly shape behavior for years. You answer messages immediately, even when you're exhausted. You apologize for things that aren't your responsibility. You explain every decision as though your life requires unanimous approval. Eventually, you begin organizing your identity around avoiding other people's discomfort. The problem is that discomfort is part of every healthy relationship. People won't always agree with you. They won't always like your decisions. And they don't have to. Emotional maturity includes the ability to tolerate someone else's disappointment without automatically interpreting it as your failure. That's easier to say than to practice. Most people grow up receiving subtle messages about acceptance. If everyone is happy with you, you're doing something right. But that's rarely how life works. The more responsibility you take for your own direction, the more likely it is that someone will disagree with it. Not because you're wrong, because different people have different expectations. Trying to satisfy all of them guarantees you'll lose sight of your own. Notice what happens when someone constantly seeks external validation. Their opinions become flexible depending on the audience. Their confidence rises and falls with compliments. Criticism feels catastrophic because it threatens the identity they're more built around being liked. That's a fragile foundation. Approval is unpredictable. Character isn't. People with a strong sense of self don't become confident because everyone agrees with them. They become confident because they've learned that disagreement doesn't automatically invalidate their judgment. That doesn't mean ignoring feedback. It means evaluating feedback instead of obeying it. There's wisdom in listening. There's danger in surrendering your entire identity to other people's opinions. Every meaningful relationship requires compromise, but compromise should never require abandoning your values. Values act like an internal compass. Without them, every strong personality you meet has the potential to redirect your life. One friend wants you to behave one way. A partner wants something else. Family expects another version entirely. Soon you're performing different identities for different people. At first, that adaptability seems useful. Eventually, it becomes exhausting. Because maintaining multiple versions of yourself requires constant emotional effort. Authenticity is often less tiring than performance. Not because authenticity is always easy, because consistency requires less pretending. One of the strongest forms of confidence is allowing your behavior to remain stable regardless of who's watching. Private integrity eventually becomes public confidence. People notice it, not immediately, but consistently. Have you ever met someone whose presence seemed calm even in stressful situations? It wasn't because they never felt pressure. It was because they had developed the ability to separate emotion from impulse. That's an underrated skill. Feeling an emotion and immediately acting on it are not the same thing. You can feel angry without becoming cruel. You can feel anxious without surrendering control. You can feel rejected without abandoning your self-respect. The space between feeling and reacting is where emotional intelligence grows. Many people never practice living in that space. Instead, they let every emotion make decisions on their behalf. That's why a single critical comment can ruin an entire day. That's why one unanswered text can trigger hours of overthinking. The mind fills uncertainty with stories. Those stories aren't always accurate. Learning to pause before believing every assumption is one of the greatest psychological advantages you can develop. Not because you'll never make mistakes, because you'll make fewer decisions driven by temporary emotion. Strength isn't becoming emotionless. It's refusing to let every emotion become your commander. And once that shift happens, something interesting changes. You stop chasing respect. You begin behaving in ways that naturally earn it. Respect is rarely requested. More often, it is observed. People study your patterns long before they decide how to treat you. Not consciously. Almost no one sits down and creates a strategy for how much respect they'll give another person. Instead, the brain watches for consistency. It notices what you tolerate. It notices what you ignore. It notices how quickly you abandon your own standards when someone important enters the room. Every interaction quietly answers a question. What happens when this person's boundaries are tested? The answer becomes your reputation, not your words, your behavior. Think about someone who apologizes before expressing every opinion. I'm probably wrong. This might sound stupid. Sorry, but those phrases seem harmless. Sometimes they're simply polite, but repeated often enough, they teach people to question your confidence before you've even finished speaking. Language shapes perception, not because certain words are magical, because repeated patterns create expectations. People begin responding to the confidence you communicate rather than the intelligence you present. The opposite is also true. Confidence without humility eventually becomes arrogance. Healthy confidence doesn't insist on being the smartest person in every conversation. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't confuse volume with influence. Influential people often ask better questions than everyone else. Questions reveal curiosity. Curiosity reveals security. People who are secure don't need every conversation to prove their value. They're comfortable learning. That's a subtle but powerful difference. Insecurity seeks validation. Confidence seeks understanding. One of the most overlooked habits of emotionally resilient people is that they don't personalize everything. Someone has a bad day. They don't immediately assume they're the cause. Someone seems distracted. They don't instantly conclude they've done something wrong. This isn't indifference. It's perspective. Human behavior is complex. Most people carry worries you'll never see. Financial pressure, family responsibilities, health concerns, private disappointments. Assuming every change in someone's route revolves around you creates unnecessary emotional weight. Instead of asking, "What did I do?" a more useful question is, "What information do I actually have?" That question slows impulsive conclusions. It replaces imagination with observation. Observation is one of the greatest advantages anyone can develop. Noticing before reacting, listening before defending, watching patterns before making permanent judgments. Strong people aren't always the fastest to respond. They're often the most deliberate. Deliberate decisions usually outlast emotional ones. There's another habit that quietly changes how people perceive you. Finishing what you begin. Promises made to yourself matter just as much as promises made to others. Every time you repeatedly ignore your own commitments, something subtle happens. Your self-trust weakens. You begin doubting your ability to follow through. Not because you're incapable, because your brain learns from evidence. Evidence isn't what you intend. Evidence is what you repeatedly do. Imagine telling yourself you'll start exercising on Monday. Monday arrives. You postpone it. The following week, the same thing happens. Eventually, your own promises lose credibility. You stop believing yourself. That's a dangerous place to live because confidence isn't built through motivation. It's built through repeated evidence that your actions match your intentions. The smallest completed promise often strengthens confidence more than the largest, unfinished dream. Progress has a psychological effect. Completion teaches capability. That's why tiny victories matter. They accumulate. The world often celebrates dramatic transformations. Reality usually works differently. Most meaningful change is almost invisible while it's happening. One healthier decision, one honest conversation, one boundary maintained, one unnecessary apology left unsaid. Individually, they seem insignificant. Repeated hundreds of times, they reshape identity. Identity isn't something you discover once. It's something your habits quietly construct. People often wait until they feel confident. But confidence usually arrives after action, not before it. Waiting for certainty keeps many people standing still. Action creates information. Information reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty shrinks. Confidence grows. It's a cycle, not an event. Notice how many opportunities are missed because someone believed they needed complete certainty first. Perfect timing rarely announces itself. Perfect confidence rarely appears. Most capable people simply begin before they feel entirely ready. They adjust along the way. Adaptation is far more valuable than perfection. Perfection creates hesitation. Adaptation creates growth. Another misconception is that emotionally strong people never experience rejection. Of course they do. They simply interpret it differently. Rejection isn't automatically proof of inadequacy. Sometimes it's incompatibility. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes another person's priorities have nothing to do with your worth. Separating outcome from identity is one of the healthiest psychological habits you can cultivate. You can fail at something without becoming a failure. You can lose an opportunity without losing your value. Those distinctions matter because identity influences behavior. If every disappointment becomes evidence that you're fundamentally lacking, you'll begin avoiding situations that carry any possibility of failure. Growth becomes impossible. The people who appear fearless usually aren't free from fear. They've simply learned that discomfort is temporary. Avoidance feels comfortable today. Growth often feels uncomfortable today, but rewarding later. Choosing between those two paths determines far more than talent ever will. Consider how often people remain silent simply to avoid awkwardness. They agree when they disagree. They smile when they're uncomfortable. They accept behavior that conflicts with their values because confrontation feels unpleasant. Short-term comfort often creates long-term frustration. A respectful conversation today can prevent months of resentment tomorrow. Boundaries aren't walls. They're instructions. They teach others how to interact with you. Without them, people rely on guesswork. Some will guess well. Others won't. Clear communication removes unnecessary confusion. It also reveals something important. People who respect reasonable boundaries often become healthier relationships. People who consistently resist every reasonable boundary provide valuable information too. Pay attention to that information. Not with anger, with clarity. The goal isn't to control how other people respond. The goal is to notice their response accurately. Reality becomes much easier to navigate when you stop arguing with what repeated behavior is showing you. Every person eventually reveals their priorities, not through speeches, through patterns. And your own patterns matter just as much. If you repeatedly protect your peace, invest in your growth, communicate honestly, and remain consistent with your values, something changes almost without your noticing. You stop needing to convince people of your strength. Your decisions begin speaking before you do. Your presence feels calmer because it no longer depends on constant approval. And perhaps the greatest shift of all is this. You stop asking whether everyone will accept you. You begin asking whether the environments, relationships, and opportunities in your life are worthy of your time, your energy, and your trust. The interesting thing about confidence is that it changes what you notice long before it changes what other people notice about you. At first, the transformation is almost invisible. You don't suddenly become fearless. You don't wake up one morning and discover that every insecurity has disappeared. What changes is your relationship with discomfort. Instead of treating discomfort as a signal to retreat, you begin treating it as information. A difficult conversation no longer feels like proof that something is wrong. It becomes an opportunity to understand what needs attention. A disagreement no longer feels like a threat to your identity. It becomes evidence that two people can see the same situation differently without either one losing their worth. That shift sounds small. It isn't. Many people spend years trying to eliminate discomfort instead of learning how to move through it. The problem is that growth rarely happens inside complete comfort. Every meaningful skill requires a period where you feel inexperienced. Every meaningful relationship requires moments of uncertainty. Every meaningful goal asks you to tolerate temporary frustration. The people who continue growing aren't necessarily more talented. They're often just more willing to remain present when things become uncomfortable. Presence is a skill. It's the ability to stay connected to what's actually happening instead of becoming consumed by the stories your mind creates. Notice how quickly the imagination can race ahead of reality. A delayed reply becomes a prediction of rejection. Constructive criticism becomes evidence of failure. One mistake becomes a forecast for the future. The mind is trying to protect you. It fills in missing information so you can prepare for possible outcomes. Sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it creates unnecessary suffering. Learning to separate facts from assumptions is one of the most practical forms of emotional discipline. Ask yourself simple questions. What do I know for certain? What am I assuming? What evidence would change my conclusion? Those questions slow emotional momentum. They create space between an event and your interpretation of it. That space is where better decisions are made. Another quality that quietly strengthens a person's presence is emotional steadiness. Not emotional suppression, steadiness. There's a difference. Suppressing emotion means pretending you don't feel anything. Steadiness means acknowledging your emotions without allowing them to dictate every response. People often trust those who remain steady under pressure because steadiness communicates reliability. Reliability isn't built during easy moments. It's built during difficult ones. Anyone can appear calm when life is predictable. Character becomes visible when plans change, expectations fail, or circumstances become uncertain. How you respond in those moments teaches others what they can expect from you in the future. It also teaches you something about yourself. Every challenge leaves evidence. Evidence that you can adapt. Evidence that you can recover. Evidence that setbacks don't automatically define the rest of your story. Too many people confuse temporary circumstances with permanent identity. They experience one disappointment and quietly begin describing themselves through it. I always fail. I'm just not good enough. Things never work out for me. The brain pays attention to repeated language, not because words create reality on their own, but because repeated descriptions influence repeated behavior. If you constantly describe yourself as incapable, you'll become less likely to pursue opportunities that could prove otherwise. Your beliefs shape your willingness to act. Your actions create new evidence. That evidence either reinforces old beliefs or begins replacing them. This is why small acts of courage matter so much. Speaking honestly when it's easier to stay silent. Declining something that doesn't align with your priorities. Following through on a commitment you made to yourself. Each action quietly updates the story you tell yourself about who you are. Confidence grows through accumulated evidence, not wishful thinking. There's another misconception worth examining. Many people assume that strong boundaries create distance. Healthy boundaries often create the opposite. They make relationships more honest. When expectations remain unspoken, resentment has room to grow. When expectations are communicated respectfully, people know where they stand. Clarity may feel uncomfortable in the moment. Confusion is usually more painful over time. You don't need everyone to agree with your decisions. You need your decisions to align with your values. That alignment creates a kind of inner stability that external approval cannot replace. Because approval changes, opinions shift, circumstances evolve. Values, when chosen carefully and lived consistently, become an anchor during uncertain times. And people are naturally drawn to those who know what they stand for without needing to announce it constantly. They recognize authenticity through consistency, not perfection. Consistency. That doesn't mean you'll never make mistakes. It means your mistakes become opportunities to learn rather than reasons to abandon your anger. Direction. Growth isn't linear. Some days you'll respond with patience. Other days you'll realize, in hindsight, that you could have handled something differently. The goal isn't flawless behavior. The goal is an increasing awareness of your patterns and a willingness to improve them. Self-awareness without action changes very little. Action without self-awareness often repeats the same mistakes. Real development requires both. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. You spend less energy trying to impress people, more energy understanding them, less energy worrying about every opinion, more energy investing in the relationships that are built on mutual respect, less energy proving your value, more energy living according to it. And that's where genuine confidence begins to feel different. It becomes quieter, more grounded, less dependent on attention. It isn't about becoming untouchable in the sense that nothing ever hurts you. Life will still bring disappointment, criticism, loss, and uncertainty. Being emotionally strong doesn't remove those experiences. It changes how you move through them. You recover more quickly because your identity isn't built on every temporary outcome. You stay curious instead of becoming defensive. You protect your peace without closing yourself off from meaningful connection. And over time, people begin responding not to an image you've carefully constructed, but to the consistency of your character. A quality that is far more difficult to imitate and far more valuable to sustain. The people who seem the most composed in difficult situations usually aren't cast of the ones with the easiest lives. More often, they're the ones who have learned an important distinction. Not every problem deserves an immediate reaction. That sounds simple until you're the one experiencing the emotion. Someone says something unfair. Your first instinct is to defend yourself. Someone ignores your effort. You want recognition. Someone misunderstands your intentions. You feel the urge to explain every detail. Those reactions are human. The question isn't whether they happen. The question is whether they become your default response. There is power in creating a pause. Not a pause because you're avoiding the issue. A pause because you're strategically allowing emotion to settle before deciding what deserves your attention. Some situations improve because you respond. Others improve because you refuse to fuel them. Learning the difference is a form of wisdom. Not every criticism deserves your energy. Some criticism contains useful information. Some reflects another person's frustration, assumptions, or perspective more than your character. Your job isn't to absorb every opinion. Your job is to evaluate it honestly. Ask yourself, is there something I can learn from this? If the answer is yes, take the lesson. If the answer is no, let the opinion remain with the person who offered it. You don't have to carry every judgment you receive. Many people unknowingly give strangers tremendous authority over their emotions. A passing comment ruins an entire afternoon. A brief disagreement occupies their thoughts for days. An opinion from someone they don't even admire suddenly becomes the standard by which they measure themselves. Notice how much influence that gives away. Imagine allowing someone you came in while you'd never met to decide your mood simply because they expressed a negative opinion. When viewed from a distance, it becomes clear how much control we sometimes hand to people who have done nothing to earn it. Emotional resilience isn't pretending those moments don't sting. It's refusing to let them define the direction of your day. One of the strongest habits you can develop is protecting your attention. Attention is one of your most valuable resources. Where it goes, your emotional energy often follows. If every distraction, every criticism, every comparison captures your attention, you'll constantly feel mentally exhausted. Not because life is unusually difficult, because your focus is being pulled in too many directions. Intentional people learn to choose where their attention belongs. They focus on the conversations that matter, the relationships that are reciprocal, the goals they can influence, the habits that improve tomorrow. That doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to become consumed by things outside your control. Control is another concept people often misunderstand. You cannot control how another person interprets your actions. You cannot control whether someone appreciates your effort. You cannot control whether another person chooses honesty, maturity, or kindness. You can influence those situations through your behavior. But influence is different from control. Recognizing that difference creates freedom. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to manage everyone else's responses, you begin investing more energy in your own decisions. You become more intentional with your words, more consistent with your commitments, more selective about where you spend your time. These choices seem ordinary. Together, they shape the quality of your life. There is also a quiet confidence that comes from accepting that not everyone will understand. People interpret your actions through the lens of their own experiences. Two people can witness the same event and leave with entirely different conclusions. That isn't always a sign that one person is dishonest. Sometimes it's simply the nature of perception. Trying to make everyone see you exactly as you see yourself is an impossible task. Instead, focus on living in a way that reflects your principles. Over time, consistency speaks louder than explanations. The same applies to trust. Trust isn't built through persuasive speeches. It's built through repeated reliability. Showing up when you said you would. Following through on your commitments. Being honest even when honesty is inconvenient. These behaviors rarely attract dramatic attention. Yet they're the reason people feel safe around you. Safety is often underestimated. People remember how you made them feel long after their trust. The details of specific conversations. Did they feel respected? Did they feel heard? Did they feel they could be themselves without fear of unnecessary judgment? Those experiences create lasting impressions. Strength doesn't require becoming emotionally distant. It requires becoming emotionally balanced. Balance allows compassion without losing discernment. It allows generosity without sacrificing self-respect. It allows forgiveness without abandoning healthy boundaries. These qualities don't develop overnight. They're practiced in ordinary moments. Every time you choose patience over impulse, every time you replace assumptions with honest questions, every time you honor a commitment to yourself, even when no one else is watching, those moments accumulate. Eventually, they become part of your character, and character has a remarkable quality. It travels with you into every room, every relationship, and every opportunity. You don't need to announce it. People experience it through your consistency. Over time, that consistency becomes more persuasive than any attempt to appear confident. Because genuine confidence isn't something you perform. It's something other people gradually recognize after watching your actions align with your values again and again.